Science, 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 science in pajamas. Alright, you guys. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about macromolecules, specifically carbon macromolecules that are essential for living things. Now, there are four main ones that we're going to talk about. Now, we talked about carbon macromolecules and carbon molecules previously. Now we're going to talk about four specific kinds of macromolecules that are essential for living things. Now they are carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. I'm going to just kind of do a quick summary of all four of them. That's it. We're not going to go into too much detail. I just want to summarize it for you guys. Alright, so first one we're going to talk about are carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, these are the main energy source for cells. In the mitochondria, which is an organelle of the cells, a lot of kids know it as the powerhouse of the cell. That doesn't tell me what it does. So what does it do? It makes energy in the form of ATP. Okay, how does it do that? By breaking down a particular carbohydrate. So as we were saying in a previous video, macromolecules, which are polymers, are made up of small repeating subunits called monomers. And one type of monomer for carbohydrates is glucose. So we have glucose. And what happens is you have a whole bunch of these or other simple monomer sugars. So other monomers of sugars include fructose and galactose. What happens is you bond these together and you get a larger structure. So far, so good? Excellent. So we call these special carbohydrate molecules, we call them polysaccharides. Saccharide refers to sugar, which is what most carbohydrates are considered, and poly refers to many. So this individual guy right here, that would be a monosaccharide, one sugar. And then the whole thing together would be a polysaccharide. Now there's good and bad sugars, and there's also sweet and not sweet sugars. Not all sugars are yummy and delicious. There's a lot of carbohydrates found in plants. For instance, we know that bread and pastas and noodles and things like that, we call them carbs because they are carbohydrates. And they have particular carbohydrates that may not be so good for us to have a whole lot of excess of, because a lot of times when we have excess carbohydrates, our body will store them. And they can be stored in fat cells or other cells, but the more you store, the more room they take up, which is why a lot of times people think or say carbs make you fat. All things in moderation though, because without carbs, you cannot survive. One particular carbohydrate, one particular monosaccharide of carbohydrates is glucose. And glucose is essential because that is the carbohydrate that your mitochondria in every single one of your cells is going to break that glucose apart in order to gain energy to power each cell. And if you can't get enough glucose to power your cells cannot function, which means they die, which means that you could die, and that would be bad. Alright. So that's what we want to summarize for for carbohydrates. Again, we're just doing a very, very super quick introduction to all four of these. Is there anything else I want to talk about? Nope. Alright. The next one we're going to talk about also gets a bad rep. It is lipids. Lipids get a bad rep because they include fats. And a lot of times people think fats are bad. Again, all things in moderation because you do need lipids. Your body even makes certain lipids all on its own. It makes certain steroids and other types of molecules to help your cells function properly. They also help to insulate the body, the blubber of different organisms like whales and sea lions and things like that. That blubber it's fat, and it's used to protect the body from the excess cold of like deep ocean or the North and South Pole. We also do have layers of fat around our organs to kind of cushion them. This way they're like little airbags. If I fall and hit my side, I don't have to worry as much about puncturing a lip or a lung because I have a layer of fat that's going to help cushion it. So they do have some good things. Now there's a few particular things we need to talk about in terms of lipids. The first is, what are they made out of? Most of the time, they have a glycerol molecule, and it can be attached to 2 or 3 or whatever amount of fatty acid chains. Now there are 3 main ones I want to talk about, and then we'll move on. So first one I want to talk about are phospholipids. Now these are super important because the membrane of your cells is a phospholipid bilayer membrane. So your cells actually are surrounded by this layer of lipids. And without them, they are the cell membrane. So without the phospholipids, you would not have cells because you don't have anything to keep all the good stuff in and all the bad stuff out. A lot of our organelles, such as the nucleus, the endoplasmic reticulums, the mitochondria, they have their own membranes. And since they have their own membranes, those are also made up of phospholipids. So again, not all lipids are bad. All things in moderation, you guys. All right, so how does a phospholipid look? So pretty much it is, we have the glycerol, we have 2 fatty acid chains, but then we also have a phosphate group. So more or less kind of sort of like that. That's not the 2 I want to spend the most time on though. Not like we're going to spend a whole lot of time, but a lot of times when people are looking to at least take in good versus bad fats, they look at saturated versus unsaturated fats. And these are very important. So a saturated fat has all single bonds. Now what I mean by that, you have the glycerol, and then actually within the fatty acid tails, it's carbohydrates, carbon and hydrocarbons, that's the word I was looking for. So it's a chain of carbons, and all their free bonds are connected to hydrogens and things like that. I believe there might be a couple oxygens in there. Now here's the thing about saturated fats. There's only single bonds between the carbons. As a result, they form these rather straight fatty acid tails. And these are actually harder for us to digest. Now these tend to be a lot more of the animal-based fats. They're the harder fats, the fats that are harder at room temperature, like butter and things like that. Now the reason why it's harder for us to break these down is because during the digestive process, the digestive enzymes can't easily access the middle part. So as a result, it takes a while to break them down, and they can just more so get stored as fat. But we also have other kinds of fats called unsaturated fats. Now they're very similar except they have some double bonds between the carbons. Now, as you can see, because of the double bonds, it kind of kinks the fatty acid chains, which means that they're kind of bent at different angles, allowing for more space in between. So then the enzymes can have easier access to the middle portion in order to break them down. The unsaturated fats tend to be a lot more of the plant-based ones, so like corn oil or things like that. These are a lot easier for us to break down because the enzymes can get in there, and these tend to be liquid at room temperature, again, like the oils. All right, let's move on to nucleic acids. So in nucleic acids, these molecules are our genetic information. We're not necessarily going to spend a whole lot of time on these right now, simply because we have a whole chapter on our most well-known nucleic acid, DNA. So that, again, that's our genetic information, our DNA, the RNA, which helps our DNA to become expressed. As a macromolecule, we tend to know DNA by its shape, which is a double helix. Really, really big macromolecule that contains all of the instructions to make us. But if we break it down, we'll actually see that there are these repeating sequences. Sorry, I'm trying to use different colors for all the different parts. All right, so we have these repeating sections. What I mean by repeating sections, I know it's kind of hard to tell, but we have these sections that include the circle, the dark square, and the green square. Now, there's a whole bunch of them together because remember, monomers bond together to form polymers. This monomer is called a nucleotide. And it consists of a phosphate group. Let's use the original colors. So we have our phosphate group. We have a 5-carbon sugar in DNA. That is deoxyribose. In RNA, it's ribose. And then we have a nitrogenous base. Now there's a few different nitrogenous bases, and it's the order and specific pattern of the nitrogenous bases that will help to determine our traits. So we have this nucleotide, sugar, phosphate, base. We put a whole bunch of them together. That's how we get our nucleic acid. Nucleic acid is a polymer. The monomer is a nucleotide. All right. And the last one we're going to introduce is proteins. A lot of times when we talk about proteins, kids automatically think to meat because they hear, yeah, protein or meat has a lot of protein in it, and that is true because proteins help build tissue. And what is meat? It's a muscle, and thus it is a type of tissue. So yeah, there is lots of protein in meat. However, it's more than just that. Other functions include lots of different things. So we tend to think of them only as tissues to help make you strong. But proteins are actually some of the most diverse molecules in terms of their functions because they don't just build tissue, they also are antibodies which protect your internal organs and systems from invading bacteria and viruses. They are enzymes that run the reactions within your cells. They are different certain hormones are proteins that help to regulate your cell processes, such as things like serotonin that kind of makes you feel content or happy. Let's see, antibodies, enzymes regulate. They also transport. We have protein channels within our cell membranes that allow only particular molecules to enter or leave the cell. So they're very, 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 very super important. Now, we mentioned these kind of briefly in our last video just as an example. So what happens is a portion of the DNA gets copied in the form of RNA, and then that RNA is used to figure out what the protein should be. Now, protein is a polymer. It is made up of smaller units called amino acids. So we have these amino acids that come together. There are 20 plus different amino acids. And you can have chains of them that are hundreds or even thousands of amino acids long. The order of the amino acids will completely dictate what the function of that protein is. Because depending on how they're ordered together, that's going to cause it to bend a certain way. Proteins fold, and after it folds, it is that folding that will determine its function. It can only fold certain ways based on the order of the amino acids. Now, we actually will get more into making proteins in a later chapter. We have a whole chapter on protein synthesis. So we're not going to get into too much detail on how we go from the DNA to the amino acid chain and all that. But we have, again, just to kind of summarize, the amino acids are the monomers. The entire thing, we actually call that a polypeptide chain. Polypeptide chain. And it is a polymer at that point. It's just a non-functional polymer. The protein doesn't get its function until it's been folded. Functional protein. After it's been folded, so we form the amino acids, we connect them in certain ways based on what the genetic information tells us, so that's going to determine the order. This chain of amino acids, we call it a polypeptide chain. We take that chain, we fold it up, and we now have a functional protein. And it will go out and do its job, whatever that job is. All right. So I hope this helped you guys. I hope it was a nice little summary. If you have any questions, hit me up in our Google Classroom or through email. But in the meantime, you guys, stay awesome, stay amazing, stay curious, and yeah, just stay safe and healthy. All right, you guys, take care. Bye-bye.